Greetings, comrades. My name is Gigantos, and today we're going to be looking at three ancient accounts of creation, flood, whatever. Just three ancient Middle Eastern accounts to see which one's older. And these are quite significant in the fields of archaeology and biblical archaeology. You see, one of the biggest claims that anyone who follows the Bible, or Torah, has to face is that apparently our books are based off a compilation of pagan mythology. A compilation, we're neo-pagans in a sense. We chose one god out of all of them to worship, and then destroyed all everyone else who disagreed and worshipped the other gods. And we're effectively neo-pagans apparently. And I know that there's a lot of, thanks to Alexander Hislop, whatever his name is, can't remember that, Alexander. There's definitely been a lot of misunderstandings going around, which no one really has time to. There's so much misunderstandings going on. It's hard to actually get. It's hard to correct people, unfortunately, and this is something I've seen myself quite a lot of times. When it comes to such accusations that we're neo-pagan or whatever, a single sentence that they claim against us may require a whole paragraph for us to return to. And so, I guess that's one of the reasons why I try to make these videos, so that you can at least understand how to answer if someone makes a claim such as, and what this video specifically focus on is the idea that the Genesis flood apparently is pagan mythology, just adopted from pagan mythology, and it was changed to match our beliefs. I can tell you now that that's very much wrong, and I'll explain why when I get around to analyzing the three manuscripts that I'll be using today. Don't be intimidated, any of you out there, if people do say something that Christianity or Judaism is based upon paganism, okay? They probably just haven't done enough research, and this video I prove why. When you get to the end of it, you'll realize, that's interesting, how come they never brought this up? So the three manuscripts, the three things we'll be looking at today are what's known as the Atra-Hasis epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Nippur flood tablet. So to start with the Atra-Hasis epic, it's effectively the Sumerian creation account. There are plenty of flood accounts throughout the world. Okay, there are hundreds of different versions. You can find them in Maya, Greece, Egypt, the Aboriginals even, the Siberians. You can find them everywhere, okay? And so this is the Sumerian one, and because it's Sumerian, it's also one of the oldest out there. So the Epic of Atra-Hasis consists of three tablets. The first tablet consists of the creation of three primordial Sumerian gods, Anu, Enlil, and Enki. And then the rest of the tablet would then talking about the rest of the creation of the earth and by the gods, and eventually the creation of humanity. The second tablet, it concerns more about the human overpopulation. In order to stop the humans basically consuming everything, Enlil sends natural disasters such as famines and droughts at intervals of 1,200 years to try and stop them. But the population control effectively. By the end of the tablet, effectively, Enlil decides to destroy humanity with the flood, and Enki is bound by an oath to effectively keep it secret. Tablet 3 concerns the actual flood myth itself, and it says how Enki basically warned the individual Atra-Hasis, which means extremely wise, of the plan to destroy humanity by flood. So he makes the poor Atra-Hasis dismantle his house to rebuild the boat, and Atra-Hasis with his family and animals boards the boat, and they seal it. And apparently even the gods were afraid when the flood started. Atra-Hasis survives the flood, where when the waters recede, he offers a sacrifice, and then Enlil is angry with Enki for violating his oath and warning Atra-Hasis. But Enki later on would say that I made sure life was preserved, apparently. Although the two of them would eventually agree that without such they would need not catastrophic events, but other ways to try and control the human population. Now, the oldest copy we have for the Atra-Hasis epic dates back to a Babylonian. The copy of it is written Babylonian in around 1650 BC. Although there are fragments of it that are older that we found that date around 1700 BC, and they are written in Akkadian, which is another incredibly old language. Now, the next flood myth that we're going to need to look at, and it's a lot older. This one is a lot more famous. Okay, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's believed to be based partly off the account of the Atra-Hasis epic. Although the Epic of Gilgamesh itself is definitely a bit questionable in terms of what it was, in terms of its dating, and the reason why is because it was never originally written as an as a single story originally. It actually started out as 5 ancient Sumerian poems, in which were later compiled they were later changed and compiled. Okay, they're later compiled and part of them changed slightly to form one longer account, one longer story, which is why it's known as an epic. Because for those of you that don't know, an epic is it's a long poem that tells a story. For instance, the Iliad and the Odyssey count as epics. And this one, the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's a lot longer. I'll try and give you a brief summary of what the tablets say. But effectively, it was about an old Sumerian king, a king of Uruk from the 3rd dynasty of Ur, known as Gilgamesh, and that's Sumerian for the name Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is Akkadian, Gilgamesh is Sumerian. The first tablet basically introduces Gilgamesh as the king of Uruk, and he is apparently 2/3 god and 1/3 man, and he's oppressing his people to the point that they cry out to the gods to help them. And so in order to stop the tyranny of Gilgamesh, the gods create a man known as Enkidu to basically go out and fight him, challenge him and fight him and hopefully defeat him. Problem is, Enkidu was very primitive, and in order to civilize him, and I'm not kidding here, it is arranged for Enkidu to be seduced by Shamhat, a temple prostitute, his first step towards being tamed. Okay, well, it gets even worse for the next part. Okay, just listen to this next sentence. After 6 days and 7 nights, or 2 weeks according to more recent scholarship, of lovemaking and teaching Enkidu about the ways of civilization, she takes Enkidu to a shepherd's camp to learn how to be civilized. Okay, I mean, let's just say that teaching methods back then were definitely a bit more questionable. But effectively, that's tablet 1. Effectively, the tyranny of Gilgamesh resulting in the gods forming the primitive man Enkidu to fight him. In tablet 2, Enkidu is he's taken to a shepherd's camp where he's civilized further without as much steel, without as much lovemaking, fortunately. And then he goes to face Gilgamesh himself. He challenges Gilgamesh to a test of strength, in which he loses, but he becomes friends with Gilgamesh. Which is not a bad way things turn out, to be fair. But apparently, Gilgamesh is a bit nice after that. However, Gilgamesh then proposes that they go to the Cedar Forest to fight a demigod known as Humbaba. That's apparently this monstrous entity in order to become more famous. However, although Enkidu and who's apparently a council of elders warning him not to, Gilgamesh ignores them and takes Enkidu with him. Tablet 3 effectively concerns the elders giving Gilgamesh and Enkidu advice for their upcoming feat. Tablet 4 is apparently Gilgamesh and Enkidu going to the Cedar Forest, in which they receive dreams and visions about the fight and other strange things. Tablet 5 is when they finally meet Humbaba. Gilgamesh is afraid after the threats that Humbaba gives him, but thanks to the encouragement of Enkidu, the two of them work together to fight him. The two of them eventually kill Humbaba, and they return back home along the Euphrates with the head of Humbaba and many cedar trees to basically build a temple for Enlil. Tablet 6 is Gilgamesh rejecting the advances of Ishtar because he was concerned about how she treated her previous lovers. In order to get revenge, Ishtar asks her father Anu to send the Bull of Heaven to go and basically kill Gilgamesh. Anu ignores her, like some annoying daughter who doesn't get away. Ishtar threatens to raise the dead and destroy all humans if Anu does not send out the Bull of Heaven. Anu then warns that Uruk will face 7 years of famine if the Bull of Heaven goes, although Ishtar still manages to send the bull, and it starts causing destruction all over the Euphrates. When Enkidu and Gilgamesh hear about the Bull of Heaven, they then go and, without any divine assistance, kill the bull, which is quite a feat in itself. And apparently, when Ishtar cries out from the feet of the bull, Enkidu hurls one of the hindquarters of the bull at her, which she probably deserves. Although unfortunately at the end of the tablet, Enkidu has an ominous dream about his apparent future death. In Tablet 7, the gods decide that either Gilgamesh or Enkidu have to die because they had killed Humbaba and Gugalana. And despite some protests from Shamash, Enkidu is the one who's marked for death. And then the rest of the tablet is about effectively Shamash trying to comfort Enkidu about his upcoming death. Apparently the famous line from this part of the tablet, when Gilgamesh finds Enkidu's body, he denies that he has died and clings to him until he sees a maggot fall from Enkidu's nose. So definitely Gilgamesh was very close to Enkidu, and seeing his best friend die was agonizing for him. In Tablet 8, Gilgamesh delivers a lament for Enkidu, in which he calls upon everything in the world to mourn for his friend. And he then prepares a massive funeral and a banquet in memory of his best friend. Tablet 9, Gilgamesh is roaming around the wild, probably a bit, needs some time by himself, mourning the death of his friend. After what happened to his friend, he is now afraid of dying. So he goes to see a person known as Utnapishtim to try and learn about the secrets of eternal life. He then goes on a very long journey to the ends of the earth, where he ends up meeting a place known as the Garden of the Gods, which is some sort of paradise full of apparently jewel-laden trees. In Tablet 10, Gilgamesh ends up traveling across the ocean with the help of Urshanabi, the ferryman. Although Gilgamesh then has a bit of a hissy fit, in which he destroys the one item that would have helped him cross the seas of death, and then Gilgamesh is tasked to cut down 120 trees and use them for punting poles to cross the sea. At the end of the tablet, they finally reach the island where Utnapishtim lives, and he asks him for help. Although Utnapishtim then reprimands him, saying that fighting fate is effectively futile, and that he's just wasted his time here, and he's going to mess up the rest of his life if he tries to continue what he's trying to do. Now, Tablet 11 is where things get interesting. This is the big one in question, which relates to the flood mythology. Gilgamesh sees that Utnapishtim appears no different than a normal human and asks him how he obtained his immortality. So Utnapishtim explains how a long time ago the god sent a great flood. And the reason why he's alive is because the god Enki told him to build a boat along with the precise dimensions and to build it out of pitch and bitumen. His family went aboard along with the craftsmen and all the animals of the field. The storm came along and the gods retreated to the heavens. Ishtar lamented the destruction of humanity and all the gods as well. The storm lasted 6 days and nights, after which all the human beings turned to clay. Utnapishtim mourns when he sees the destruction. His boat lodges on a mountain where he releases a dove, a swallow, and a raven, sometime after each other, and when the raven doesn't return, he realizes that the flood is gone, and he opens the door and they leave. So it's very similar to the Genesis flood account, in a sense. When Enlil arrives on the earth and sees that they were survivors of the flood, Ishtar condemns him for starting the flood in the first place. Enki also rebukes him for sending a flood to punish all of humanity when only a small percentage of them were actually the evil ones. Enlil then blesses Utnapishtim and his wife and gives him eternal life. The gift of eternal life that Utnapishtim and his wife received was a unique gift from Enlil, and it cannot be achieved. And to try and prove this point, Utnapishtim challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh falls asleep several times, and so Utnapishtim says, look, you can't even conquer sleep, let alone conquer death. Utnapishtim, though, does give Gilgamesh some royal robes and a trip back home so he can return back to Uruk, and then tells him that at the bottom of the ocean there's a special plant that will help make him young again. Whilst Gilgamesh does manage to get the plant back from the bottom of the ocean, however, when he stops to bathe, it is eaten by a serpent. And so Gilgamesh then mourns at his entire wasted life, and he returns back home to Uruk. Tablet 12 is the conclusion of this epic. It's, I guess you could probably say, the most emotional part in a sense. Although it seems almost out of place concerning some of the information on it, such as apparently Enkidu still being alive at this point in time. So perhaps this tablet was written before the compilation of these tablets, and in which it fit an older version of it that made more sense, but this seems more an attempt to try and get closure for the rest of the epic. After the compilation of it, so the newer versions that we do have now, it makes more sense. So what happens is that instead of Enkidu still being alive, where Gilgamesh then complains about all that happened, when Gilgamesh returns home, he then begs the gods to give him back his friend. Some of the gods disagree, but some of them agree. And so they open a crack in the ground, and the ghost of Enkidu comes out of the ground, and they sit together. And then Enkidu starts describing what the underworld is like for Gilgamesh. The difference between that and the older versions is that Enkidu was already alive at that point in time for some reason. But that's effectively the Epic of Gilgamesh. I know that's pretty rushed, but again, this is quite an extensive thing, and I can't go into much detail if I want to make this video actually watchable for people, because it might get too boring. In terms of, it's the oldest story, you could see, it's the oldest literary piece of work, so it's definitely interesting to read. And you guys, I could put a link if you want to, like an online version, so you guys can read it for yourself. It's quite interesting. But Tablet 11 is the main tablet of concern here, because that focuses on the flood side of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood part. Now, the oldest copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we have dates back to the 7th century, so around 600s BC, when the Neo-Babylonian Empire was rising to power. However, by looking at the literary style of it and the names, we find that even though it's referencing Gilgamesh, who the king himself apparently lived in like 2300 BC. The compilation of the Epic of Gilgamesh was around 1800 BC. So it's around 1200 years older than the oldest copy that we do have now. This puts it as being 200 years older than the oldest copy of the Atra-Hasis epic. Even though that's probably because the Atra-Hasis epic is older, we just don't have an older copy of it, from which the Epic of Gilgamesh was later on based off. Or maybe they were based off the same account. I mean, that is a possibility too. Noah lived to be 950 years old. And depending on when Nimrod was born, Noah would have been ancient. And so hearing about this 950-year-old man who had part of a righteous family that survived the flood, that would make some sense, but clearly Noah was not immortal. Now, even though biblical archaeologists at the time who had found these translations believed this to be extra biblical evidence for the fact that there was the ancient flood did happen, that the biblical flood did happen, and point out the similarities, saying, see, even if the paganism part about it is wrong, that's still proof that the Bible is correct. Unfortunately, with the rise of secular archaeology, it backfired, and so we all said that the Bible is based off pagan mythology, and it's been like that ever since, unfortunately. So it's no longer a book of lies, but a book of mythology. Clearly, those who do not want the Bible to exist are trying their best to undermine it any way they can. But this is where the Nippur flood tablet comes in, and this is what makes it very interesting. Now, I'm going to give to you the account of which the Nippur flood tablet was found. Now I have to take it a pinch of salt, because this guy, Bill Cooper, for some reason quotes references the two Babylons. Anyone who quotes the two Babylons references it that's not in the context of trying to refute it, they don't know history much, okay? But there's, from what I can see, the Genesis flood tablet, or Nippur flood tablet here. That's what's important here. It's fine to look at, it's fine to read. It's under no fundamentalist interpretation, so I'm just going to read it to you about the account of its founding. So between 1889 and 1900, the University of Pennsylvania conducted 4 seasons archaeological digs in the ancient Babylonian city of Nippur. Part of their yield was the excavation of a mound, which the archaeologists nicknamed Tablet Hill, which was all that remained of the temple library that had been destroyed by the Elamites. In the last dig in this 1900, they found, among the tablets, they found a fragment of a tablet, tiny piece, which was made of unbaked clay and covered with nitro crystals. Being one of the leading members of the dig, this guy who discovered the tablet and will later translate it, known as Herman Volrath Hilprecht, he was a university professor. And back in Philadelphia in October 1909, he was going through the boxes of tablets trying to see if there was anything interesting worth translating. He picked up the tablet and he was unable to really read anything because there's so much nitrite crystals on it. But the one word that he could read was the 3 cuneiform signs, which read Abubi, which means deluge or flood. And so after quickly checking the box to see if it was maybe a fragment of other fragments that could be compiled into one larger tablet, he then says about trying to clean it, which was quite a task in itself, because A, it's unbaked clay, and B, it was so fragile that even just removing the crystals could potentially break the surface. However, by the 1st of December, he had finished cleaning the tablet, and he would be able to read it. Fragment CBM 13532 is one of the most significant finds in archaeology, especially biblical archaeology. I can tell you that right now. This fragment is very small. It's only 2.75 inches by 2.375 inches. Unfortunately, huge sections of it were missing. It was very fragmentary, and there were only 14 lines of it left. This would have been part of a tablet that would have been 7 by 10 inches and covered 130 to 136 lines of text on both the front and back. But here we only had one side and just a piece of that one side. So it's unfortunate that so much information was missing, but it's what it contained that's important here. This tablet was here written in Semitic Babylonian, which we would call Akkadian, and it's an incredibly old language. Now, I'm going to read to you what this tablet says. I'm not going to read what it says to you in Akkadian, because I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong. But this is what the tablet says, and I'll pause every time I meet a blank, okay? Just so you know how fragmented this is. The confines of heaven and earth I will loosen. A deluge I will make, and it shall sweep away all men together. But seek thou life before the deluge cometh forth. For over all living beings, as many as there are, I will bring overthrow, destruction, and annihilation. Build a great ship, and total height shall be its structure. It shall be a houseboat carrying what has been saved of life. With a strong deck, cover it. The ship which thou shalt make, into it bring the beasts of the field, the birds of heaven, and the creeping things, two of everything instead of a number, and the family, and that's it effectively. It's that fragmentary. But there's immediately several interesting things about this account of the Nippur flood tablet. Firstly, if you look at the line 8, Hilprecht translates the word houseboat from the word magurgurum. It can also be translated, it's also related to an old Semitic word makuru, which means ark. In line 9 of the tablet, it tells to cover this ark with a strong deck, which is not what would have been found on Babylonian ships and boats. They had no covering like that. Whereas in Genesis 8:13, we are told that Noah was meant to build the ark with a strong deck. For the name of the ark, if we go to Heidel's later translation of the fragment, on line 8, where we read Shi'ilu magurgurum babilu na'at rat na'pishtim, it reads as, the same ship shall be a giant boat, and its name shall be preserver of life. The word for life in this is na'pishtim, which the Sumerians will immediately know that is meant to be the Sumerian name for Noah in that flood account. So even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, us na'pishtim, that would have been translated as the man of Napishtim, or the man of the ark. Another critical thing to notice here is that throughout this entire fragment, not a single Babylonian or pagan deity is mentioned. As I told you before, when we were looking at the Atra-Hasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh, those tablets and those epics were littered with pagan names and pagan gods. Ishtar, Enlil, Enlil, there were a ton of them. Not a single one is mentioned in this. In fact, the perspective this is told by, I will loosen, I will bring, not we will bring or there will be. The perspective this is telling us is of a monotheistic deity. Not a polytheistic, not a council, not a god warning someone of another god sending a flood, but a monotheistic entity who is going to destroy the earth, but that same entity is also warning someone that they will do that. Which is very strange that something like this would occur in an age where apparently polytheism was meant to be the only, worship going on at that point in time. And perhaps the most interesting part about this, the Nippur flood tablet, is its age. You see, this was found in the remains of the temple library of Nippur, and the way we date this, the minimum cap, the youngest possible date for this temple library is the destruction layer it's part of. That was when the Elamites attacked the Nippur and the region. The Elamites attacked Nippur and destroyed the library in 2100 BC. That is 300 to 400 years older than the time frame, depending on which part of it you take, between the 18th century BC time frame for the Epic of Gilgamesh to have been compiled in. 300 to 400 years. Not only that, but when Hilprecht first translated this, he believed that, it's very unlikely that this Nippur flood tablet would have been written the day it was destroyed, like just hours before. So it's probably been there for a while. This could be a copy of a copy of a copy, for all we know. But he suggests that it was around, minimum for him, around 2137 BC. Which means that we have an account of the flood that is 300 to possibly even, or maybe even half a millennium older than the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is seen as the oldest. Okay, it's possible that the Atra-Hasis account could have been the oldest fragmentary account of the flood, but in terms of the oldest complete account, that would have been the Epic of Gilgamesh. But even despite that, the Nippur flood tablet is still 300 to half a millennium older than that. And it's from the perspective of more of a monotheistic entity, which means that even at that point in time, there was a non-polytheistic narrative of the accounts of creation and of the flood going around that point in time. So the idea that monotheism came after polytheism is wrong, because whereas people would associate, for instance, for the Hebrews, they usually say, okay, well, it came after Moses took them out of Egypt. That's the oldest credible date they'll give them, so 1446, 1447 BC. But here we see something that's like 700 years older than that, at least. that's not taking into account the ancient Chinese, who are also monotheists as well, which together do prove that there was definitely monotheism going around that point in time. That immediate and the serious similarity between the Nippur flood tablet and the account of the flood in Genesis proves that whatever Moses was using, whether it was God telling him directly, Moses using ancient historical sources, or Moses using oral tradition, whatever it was, it is an ancient account. It's an ancient perspective. And that is one of the reasons why I love using the Nippur flood tablet as when I'm arguing with people, usually atheists and atheists talk about how the flood is meant to be pagan and everything, or the Bible's meant to be pagan. I immediately just say, look at the Nippur flood tablet. It predates any pagan account of the flood. And it's right. It's right. It does. It predates them all. And there's nothing they can say to that, because they immediately go, oh dear. Because even if you could point to, like, ancient Babylonian statues, there's no way you can prove that those statues, that necessarily the legends attributed and stories attributed to those statues are as old as the statues themselves. Whilst we could say, okay, well, it's possible that maybe the epic of Gilgamesh is 100 years older than what we think it is. Atra-Hasis epic is 100 years older than what we think it is. The same could also apply to the Nippur flood tablet. So the same logic that would be used to make these pagan accounts of the flood seem ancient also makes the Nippur flood tablet more ancient. If the Nippur flood tablet had not been made on unbaked clay, it's very possible we could have had the oldest account of Genesis in history. Maybe not necessarily the same as Genesis, but so close. So whilst that's, I guess, pretty much it for this part of this video, really, just remember something from this video. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atra-Hasis creation myth, or Sumerian creation myth, those two tablets are children compared to the Nippur flood tablet. Okay, from this point in time in history, the Atra-Hasis myth, the Atra-Hasis creation myth is what, 3,600 years old, almost 3,700. The Epic of Gilgamesh is almost 3,800 years old. But the Nippur flood tablet is at least 4,100 years old, 4,200 years old possibly. So when people come forward saying how we apparently took the account of the flood from the Epic of Gilgamesh, know that they were wrong. I can go more into about the historicity of Genesis. I've got this book here and I've got more to get as well and read. But the sheer existence of the Nippur flood tablet, not only does that prove that it was a monotheistic worship going around that point in time, but also that an account of the flood and of the creation could exist before polytheism was. But that's it for this video. So if you like this video, please give a like, please share my videos, please comment what you think of them, any videos you want me to do. Please subscribe to my channel so you can see more content, and please ring the bell so you keep updated with my video releases and my next up in my biblical archaeology series. Next episode, I may continue to look through this because there's definitely a lot of interesting things here. I could probably do a substantial series alone about the flood myths. I mean, there's hundreds here. Cherokee, Mayan, what else? Aztec, Chinese, Thailand. There's definitely a huge amount here. Or I could go onto the Sumerian kings list, or possibly evidence for Melchizedek, or evidence for Abraham. This is a pretty good book. I mean, seriously, I'm going to look forward to reading this. I'm looking forward to making a series and helping you all defend the historicity of the Bible. But that'll be for those videos. So anyway, God bless you all. See you next video, comrades. Until then.